Tired of outdated marketing advice aimed at the industrial and manufacturing space? My name is Salim Malouf. Join me and my co-host Chris Carolyn as we deliver candid insights from growth-minded leaders, helping you drive results and tackle modern challenges. Cut through the noise to get no-nonsense expertise. Welcome to the Manufacturing Marketing Show. Clint, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're happy to
I'm
have
happy
you.
to talk to you guys.
Clint, you've had some interesting experience. Why don't you take a moment and just talk us through quickly?
Yeah, so I've been primarily on the sales side of things, industrial sales. I got into it like anybody else does by accident. I think it was a job fair over a decade ago in college where a guy, he seemed like a good guy. He said he was looking for good help. We didn't need to know too much about the business or anything like that. And so I started working for this large industrial supply company, which quickly evolved into sales, which evolved into outside sales and then branch management for a while. And then after about close to 10 years of that, I found another industrial, it's a manufacturing company, so still in sales, still what you'd consider outside sales, for a manufacturing company that sells to manufacturers. And the company that I started with was a super big company. It was Fortune 500 company, over 20,000 employees. You work inside, they're very proud of the fact that they give you lots of autonomy, which means lots of opportunities, which is cool. But at the end of the day, you're still kind of a cog in the wheel because you have autonomy within like the greater scope of what they've already set in play. So good things and bad things. And then went from a company with 10,000 employees or 10,000 salespeople to a company with 2 salespeople. And they're in a much different stage of their journey. And it allows for lots of different decisions to be made and to be involved in lots of different decisions and kind of a different approach overall to what your daily functions are, how you contribute to the company and things like that.
Thank you, Clint. Just wanted to say we love manufacturing here, and everything we do at Conveying Your Message is about working on putting the sales teams in front of the customers and away from their desks, trying to do administrative jobs like updating their CRM or sending emails. We try to do as much as we can to make them focus on the human relationships, which we know is very important in the manufacturing industrial space. It's a space that is older than a lot of spaces here, and it was thriving even before the internet was a thing. So a lot of tenured sales teams have a lot of importance on the human-to-human relationships, and I would like to ask you about what is your approach for in your sales process during all these
approach as in just like a broad question, or is there something specific that you
basically the focus on the human aspect of the sales relationship?
Okay. So something that I learned from the first company that I was at, their competitive advantage is to be in front of customers. They have so many employees and so many salespeople because their competitive advantage is to be on the ground, standing in front of the customer, walking into their building, which is if you're not used to that, that's kind of a foreign concept sometimes, that you can usually just walk into these places and start building relationships from the ground up. So, and the reason is because manufacturing, like you said, is they've been around for a long time. Um, a lot of these companies are at least second, third generation companies, and they've done business for the same way in a lot of respects for the past 50 years plus. And the way that business is done is face to face, and it's in just a broad brush stroke. Um, there are a lot of people that aren't as open to change. They like the way that things have always been done, and so yeah, just being in front of people. That's something I've taken with me. It's a completely different experience. It's a completely different conversation standing in front of somebody, like a potential customer, a potential um, buyer, or whoever it is. Just your presence, you looking into somebody's eyes, I think is a completely different experience than sending emails, sending calls, even doing so many good things that marketing can do to build authority behind the scenes. But there's still, in manufacturing especially, there's a lot of face-to-face time, and that goes a long ways.
Yeah, and I think like I'm glad you bring that up because it reminds me of I worked at an international company and they were headquartered like outside of the US. Meanwhile, one of the market leaders was inside the US, and they both had market dominance largely because of the sales coverage they each had in their own country, right? So then when we try to compete inside the same country where the market leader, and we have like 6 sales guys compared to like maybe even 50 or 100, to try and match that is obviously impossible. It's a scale that has been built up over
Right.
years, and to compete with that, like what we've seen, it's very hard to figure out other ways. And that's where especially as COVID hit, the importance of the website and content to really scale that relationship, to help the sales team scale that relationship. It's a perfect example of why we want to hear from guys like yourself. Like, this is the manufacturing marketing podcast, but all these things need to work together. And too often it's like, okay, we'll just put up our logo and website and shoot some leads over to the sales guy, and like it just doesn't work anymore. Like, if you get in front of the person, sure, but the work that has been done over the years to create the scale that these companies has, you guys can't be everywhere at once. So I'm sure you learned as you scaled down, you know, kind of the differences. So I would love to hear from that perspective, like as you made that change into the smaller, startup, like was that concept understood? Were you expected to try and, match that somehow? How did you approach
Yeah.
that?
So we also I went from selling within a 10 square mile radius to selling internationally. And I started by building up, I live in Dallas, and building up like the Dallas territory first, which was super helpful because what I did from day one was there wasn't really an expectation to spend that much time in front of customers. But just from what I've seen, what I've known, I just spent the next like month. Anybody that could possibly use our product, I just drove around, burned a bunch of gas, walked into places, and and spoke to people face to face. A funny story about that. I went from an industry which was you sell everything, you sell industrial supplies. There's a million customers that do the same thing, or a million companies that do the same thing. And then I went to a super niche manufacturing company where we only sell to a select type of company. And there's only so many suppliers in the space. And so one of the very first places that I walked into I just walked into. I was like, "Hey, this might be weird, but do you have any use for our product?" And the purchaser, and whereas like before, like if I walk into a company and say, "Hey, do you use safety glasses?" They're like, "Yeah, so so do we do," and there's a billion other companies that try to sell them to us. And so I walked into this company. I was like, "Hey, do you use this product?" And the guy goes, "Hell yeah." I was like, "Oh, this is cool." It's like there's much less competition, and people are a lot more open when it's more niche like that. There's less suppliers, and there's actually a lot of really cool relationships in this industry. So your question, can you repeat it?
Like so it sounds like that was some insight, like immediately, you know, when you are smaller guys, like having a differentiated, product, or it's kind of a breath of fresh air, not trying to be everything to everybody. You saw immediately that there was like a different reaction. So kind of how did that, did that immediately catch on for you? Like, did you like take that and like bring it back to like, hey, we need to be talking about, trying to make this connection, like as we, the few of us go out to people? Like, how did that help you, learn quickly how you're going to walk in someplace and, get the message across?
Okay. So yeah, it helped with our messaging. It helped with knowing what differentiates us. And obviously it also helps with like seeing their company, seeing what's important to them. It helps me know how I can fill that need. And so whether it's walking into another, like a similar type of company, or it's sending out cold emails or cold calls or anything like that, I have a much better understanding of what they need to be successful. And which sounds a little bit like a platitude, but I really mean that. It's you develop kind of an intuitive sense of what people need. And the cool thing about in-person sales is like you learn it in marketing and measuring engagement and other KPIs and stuff too. But you learn it in a different way, I think, when you're standing in front of the customer. And you develop this intuitive sense, like I said, of what people need and what they're looking for and how you can actually meet that need.
Clint, I'm interested. You're talking about this in-person experience and how much value you're able to extract from it. During lockdowns, that was not really possible, was it? Right? How did that affect your process, and were you able to still, get that human connection outside of the in-person, uh, sales call? And now that things have opened back up, how have you adapted? Have you shifted back? Have you retained anything from the adaptation that you did during lockdowns? Walk
Yeah,
us
like
through
I
that.
said, manufacturing doesn't like change. And so when things started shutting down, most manufacturing companies are considered essential. And so they kept going. And since they kept going, they continued to need our product. And at the company I was at the time, a lot of our um, service was kind of in person. It was like being involved on the production floor to create inventory management systems and things like that. So honestly, aside from carrying around Lysol and wearing a mask, it didn't change too much. But I'll also say that moving forward into what we do now, getting that in-person intuition, seeing as many customers as makes sense, like as are in your region, it's really helpful to move forward. And whether you see people in person or not, you still have that internal sense of what's going on. So I don't see, I'm not in person with customers near as much as I used to be. But using that groundwork at the beginning it helps me to, I can still be effective when I reach out to other companies.
Is that a change that you chose, or is it because you started feeling that it wasn't as needed as before? Like, what drove that reduced amount of in-person
The
time?
biggest thing was that we're so niche that there's just a limited number of customers in a certain area. And if there's a large opportunity, I will do my best at the very first chance to, whether it's in another state, wherever it is, I will do my best to go be there in person, because that like trust is developed so much in those meetings. But aside from that, aside from like large meetings, like large opportunities with new customers, um, most of it is calls and emails, because of the nature of where our customers are. Like I said, there's only so many close to me, um, and I might be talking to a small customer in Las Vegas that probably isn't worth, like, we can't get our money out of the trip because of like how much they'll actually how much revenue it'll bring into the company. So it wouldn't necessarily make sense. And there's a lot of those like smaller to mid-sized companies. So it doesn't make sense to see everybody. Um, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's obviously a couple different perspectives. One of them I'm curious about, because we also hear about, not only from the salesperson's perspective, but also from the prospect and the buyer's perspective. They learned a lot of new stuff during COVID, and like even some of them learned the power of video calls. So, did you see that from the customer's perspective? Like maybe what once would have been like, yeah, come on by, you know, change into, let's just, have a quick video call or keep this via email. You don't really need to come by. Did you
Yeah,
feel
some
some
of
of
that.
that?
And it's probably made my job, now that I do what I do, it probably made it easier because people are more likely to trust somebody that is they're just communicating with via email or video call or something like that. So definitely some of
Right.
it.
Yeah. And I think like, and then to your last point of the Vegas example, it definitely taught businesses, about the cost like of travel, and just, kind of just willy nilly, not really evaluating every trip like they do now. So I think it's super interesting, because especially from people outside, because we're both in Texas, we experience the same essential, business plus Texas openness, when it came to what was going on. So the assumption that everybody just started doing business differently because of COVID is not always, accurate. And I think when talking to industrial manufacturing, it's easy to say like, okay, everybody's doing video calls now. And, in Texas, it was like 1 month
Yeah.
maybe where we were
Yeah.
forced to, not go out. And, there's a different conversation to be had about that. But the fact is like life didn't really change that much in certain situations when doing business with manufacturing. So I think it's important, and that's why we want to have these varying perspectives. Like we got to keep the assumptions, at the door sometimes, and again, get back to the human, the human level, and just understanding. Because even then, it was like, some international companies or some, national companies, like their policy, determined what that company was going to let in the door,
Mm-hmm.
if what you needed to have. So there was all these different variables. So I'm glad you highlighted, that there was just so many takeaways. And at the end of the day, it got to like, okay, what is the real cost, of what we're doing here? Is there a way to do it better? What are the customers saying? So coming back to, those needs, I think is a perfect way to, put it, from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm curious, did you guys see, since I would say that you were slightly more removed on the marketing side, only in the fact that you're not face to face. So did you guys see like an increased trust from somebody that they've never met before? Like, did you find it easier to get wins through marketing?
Well, at the time, I was actually doing
Oh,
outside
really?
sales myself, selling handheld, metal analysis equipment to like scrap yards and the metal supply chain. And, I watched this happen. And this is where, like, once the assumptions get down to the customer level without talking to them and understanding what they're actually going through, like, because immediately, so this handheld device was one of those things that supposedly you could only sell in person and if you got it in their hand, right? But then immediately, March rolls around, every vendor starts talking about virtual demos. Their customer base had never done a virtual demo before. So assuming that, like, hey, we can set up a video call and, you guys can still demo this. It's going to be okay. One of the first videos I did was like, this is how a virtual demo works, right? Because it's new for everybody. And, I went 6 for 6 that summer, not being in person, right? Like at the end of the day, these analyzers, they all do the same thing. Like there's different things that the customer cares about. And that's what you can do, in a video. But it was just super interesting. Like, I was helping people plug in their, webcam for the first time just to have the sales call. Right. And that's where just understanding. So that's like kind of my perspective, but then immediately transitioning to another company where, I was just in marketing and knowing that it's a bigger instrument, it's a higher dollar sale, and they've been doing virtual demos forever because you just don't ship this stuff around, right? What they did have to adjust is they could no longer just invite people, into the space. So then it became, okay, how do we make more interactive demos, like where they can like, log into the system and that's where, usually the digital experience of modern marketers can help. Like, are we using the right tools? Do we have the right bandwidth in the building? Like, why do we keep dropping these calls? Like connecting the dots with IT, like, it doesn't have to be this hard. So helping from that perspective, was where I spent my energy because I'm not trying to change what's working. Right. But now all of a sudden, like it's been multiplied by 100 and it's not going as well when you're doing it 10. Like, so how do we scale that?
Yeah.
Right. Was a lot of the conversations
and
I was having.
It's not either. It's not either or. It's both. Like you want some face-to-face interaction and you want to build that trust, but also that's not scalable because it's really expensive. Like the cost of having 10,000 employees to cover America is really expensive. And so, or if you have, like you said, like a very complex, like heavy, big product that you're selling, you're not going to be toting that around and like trying to get in the door places. And so it's got to be, I think the face-to-face isn't going away, but neither is like the marketing, like building behind the scenes, like building an asset, building.
It's interesting listening to you guys talk about like the more transactional sales aspect and the adaptation that needed to happen. I was in a company that did mostly consultative sales, and they used to sell 7-figure, 8-figure, end of line custom solutions. And a lot of the paradigm before COVID was that you have to, put everybody in a conference room, put up a big TV, and then just go through the blueprints and talk with the technical teams. And taking your best technical people, out of commission to go and help the sales teams sell this, versus during COVID, suddenly everybody's on a screen. now you can have access, instead of sending your mid-level engineer, because the most senior person is busy with something else and they cannot travel 2 weeks to do this pitch. Now suddenly you have the best technical talent that is ready to just jump on a video call, screen share, and just talk through all of these blueprints, get through. We witnessed the at least the consultative cycle before a quote gets generated go from weeks to maybe a couple of days, based on the complexity of the process. And after everything opened up, these customers have seen the value of this, and the number of requests that company, I'm not part of that company anymore, but I'm still in contact with a lot of friends there, and a lot of requests of like, no, we need you here to shake your hand. Those are quickly going away, because everybody has seen the value of, okay, instead of getting your junior engineer, now we get the chief engineer, and that we can get our solutions real quick. So it has had long lasting effects on their sales cycles.
So we talk about like, the how digital, is required to like deal with some of this stuff. How have what has been your experience as far as, either having or not having, marketing to lean on for that? Like you mentioned, I know you're getting at like, you get a ton of different experience when it comes to startup mode. Like everybody's wearing like 10 hats versus the big company where you had one very
Right.
specific hat that you just had to grind every day. As you've like, what did that kind of teach you as far as, some of the hats you've had to wear outside of, just going door to door?
Yeah, coming from the big company, it's everybody knows who that company is. All the manufacturing companies know who that company is. And so you walk in, you have, 90% of the authority that you need. And then going to the small company, you're first and foremost, you have to tell people that you exist. And then you have to tell them why you matter, why you can meet their needs in a way that another company does. And then leaning on the marketing. And obviously marketing has different functions. The goal is to get the customer across the finish line, I think, just in general. But there's marketing that's sales enablement, which is, hey, like I have flyers for you. I have a brochure. I have instructional videos I can send you. And starting from zero on that it's actually fun. It's challenging. So working together with the other people on the team to come up with some of that sales enablement stuff is kind of a first step. And then there's also marketing that's a revenue arm that's like operating by itself in conjunction with sales, but still apart from sales. And that's the point to where that's kind of where we are now. Because my job is to bring revenue into the company. And so whether that is going and knocking on somebody's door, whether that is like creating like prospecting and like different solutions for helping everybody on the team to be able to find customers, or whether that's, hey, how do we put the right person in place to start this revenue wheel rolling? Like that, it's all on the table. It's just so many things are new. There's so many things that are going on, and sales isn't even, surprisingly, in a small company, and that's not always the primary concern. Sometimes it's production, sometimes it's operations. Like, how do we keep up with what we already have? And so, to sum it up, I think just everything's on the table as far as like sales, marketing, and just looking at that big, broad sphere of possibilities and deciding what the next step is.
Right. And I think like, to put it another way, it sounds like you're realizing, there's a customer journey, and a customer experience to be understood and
Yeah,
addressed. And it becomes quite impossible for, just one section or one part of the organization to really address that effectively. And you got to figure out how to get everybody in the room, to talk about this stuff. And it does feel like, well, it can be fun to just have like everything on the table. After you talk about everything, understanding where to start
right.
is usually a challenge. So how are you guys, is that where you guys are at? Like, how are you thinking
That's
about, okay, we've had this insight now, like,
Yeah,
now what?
that's where we're at. So there needs to be, what I've found is there needs to be one person in the room that knows enough to say, hey, this is what we should do next. Because we're in a company, when you're all sitting around a table and everybody has ideas, it ultimately, the direction is going to go in whoever's idea, whoever that is that has the most power, who has the most influence in the company. And so if there's not somebody that you can clearly say, hey, this guy, like, what do we do? What's the next step? Show us the options and then show us the benefits and of each direction, and then like advise us on the next step. So I I suggest having that person ahead of time pointed out, like identified, or bringing in somebody like yourselves that has done this in different companies and that has that authority to advise on kind of like the next step. So I think that's super important.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you when you said that person, does it matter who that person is? Because in our
Yeah,
experience, it does. It does matter who that person is. If that person is coming from marketing, for example, in an organization that doesn't put marketing, sales, and service under one umbrella as a revenue, organization, typically that doesn't have the same weight as, for example, a sales leader saying the same thing. And we are we've seen it in software, that this move towards, instead of having siloed sales, marketing, and service, like pushing everybody together, having almost the same goals and working together, the alignment is much easier than what we've witnessed in the industrial and market and manufacturing space, where there seems to be like this, the sales silo, the marketing silo, and the service silo. So having someone who can rally everybody together under one umbrella, under one goal, and being the person that says, okay, here's what everybody's going to do, and we're aligning on this and that, usually holds more weight than just disparate people trying to pitch directions, and then going to a vote and saying, okay, we're going to vote that we're going to go this direction. Because then when you get to the implementation, now you have to get that buy-in all over again. At least that's what we've been
yeah,
doing.
and especially, I mean, even if you just pay somebody to come in, all of a sudden you're paying that person to come in, so you're going to listen to what they have to say.
That's
Yeah. And
kind
I
of
think,
why
Yeah,
we exist.
important.
yeah,
That's why we're not in house anymore.
Yeah,
yeah, we did our fair share of, I experienced my fair share of, uh, you can be a prophet to the world, but nobody in your hometown is going to listen to you. Uh, and what I think is interesting though is that there's always some story related to having tried, some of this stuff before, and some of the challenges, because it is, there is an avenue towards getting excited about this stuff. It is new. You hear it enough times outside, you're like, okay, let's go and do this marketing thing. Let's do this growth thing. We know we're modest. We've never done this before, so let's get somebody that we can have do it, right? And I think the challenges I've seen there is like there can't be that disconnect where it's just you're going to bring somebody, either you do hire somebody in and then expect them to just, go and do the thing, like, or you do invest in that, third party and just expect to just send some emails and then they're going to be able to do all the marketing for you. It does have to be bringing everybody, in under that umbrella. It often helps to have somebody internally, like, one of their big responsibilities has to manage these relationships for that, third party to be successful. That consultant, they certainly can come in, and tell you exactly what you need to do. And sometimes that's going to work, sometimes not, but in most cases not, because it does need to be two-way conversations, because it is everything, is on the table now. It's much different than just having the best product and managing margins, and, even responding the quickest is getting harder and harder because there's so many places that you have to respond. Right. So I think just, understanding the who is important, like being good with asking for help, but then understanding that doesn't absolve the whole team from, being involved in the process. It does have to be a team sport, because everybody, along the line, especially all the customer facing teams, are impacting this whole journey. And, it just gets, obviously it makes everything down the line easier.
Yeah. It's also, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it can be scary for a company who's, they've done something for 2 or 3 generations, and then you have salespeople that are communicating your message. And, if you have a bad salesperson or something, they have a bad experience with the customer, your reputation isn't necessarily on the line, but all of a sudden you're putting out these messages to, through the internet to, like a permanent kind of situation. And so all of a sudden things have to be right. Like, you want to be able to stand behind what you're saying, and you want the message to be the correct message, and you want to maintain your relationship. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into taking those first steps.
We have seen this conversation very recently, like as recent as yesterday on LinkedIn, talking about like messaging online if you're a startup or a small company, getting feedback on your messaging and deciding if your messaging is contentious. Should you dial it back or should you double down? And a lot of the times, dialing back that messaging, if there's nothing wrong with it, it's just the fact that it makes some people in the industry uncomfortable. Sometimes dialing it back might be the wrong move. If some people in the industry are uncomfortable, it's because there's something that is shaking up the status quo. There's an opportunity there for you to make people understand that, hey, you don't have to settle for what's out there. There is something different. And that relies as effectively if you're not selling smoke and mirrors, if you're truly different, if you're truly delivering an experience that people have been longing for, then sometimes that messaging that is contentious, you have to double down on it. But that is scary, because if you hear negative feedback from the industry, and someone who's been in the industry for 50-70 years, and everybody knows everybody, that might be, they might start getting cold feet and just pull out and just turn off that activity, turn off the marketing team, turn off whatever messaging we're doing, just because we're hearing bad feedback. But bad feedback is not always bad, as long as you understand where it's coming from and what is the context of that.
Yeah, that can be scary as well, I'm sure. Because at the end of the day, it's a fine line. At the end of the day, I think manufacturing companies, they're buying something that they need, and they just want to buy it from somebody that they like and they trust, and somebody that's giving them a good value. And so, coming out with that contentious messaging, I think you see that more with like startups and things like that, to where they came out of nowhere, they're competing in a big space, versus these companies that have been around for 50, 100 years that are just trying to get people what they need to continue their business. And so, yeah, I agree that messaging and marketing and ads should probably be like dig deep, like find those like borderline controversial messages, or at least like show how you're different, like actually say something. Like there's a quote from I think it's The Elements of Style, which is on copywriting. It's like, when you make sure you say something, make sure you actually said it, because you probably didn't. And it's just like having that clarity of like, this is what this is, which can be contentious, but also keeping in mind and holding the fact that like these are companies that have been around for a long time, and they're just trying to get people what they need to continue their business.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that like a lot of the times tenured companies have like this new breakthrough in some new technology, and that's when it's time to break out that contentious messaging. I do agree with you. If like nothing's changed, uh, that contention might not yield the results that you would expect. But if you're on the brink of like an industry changing technological breakthrough, you owe it to yourself to
Yeah,
break a few eggs, because otherwise your technological breakthrough is going to be buried. Nobody's going to understand it. I know Chris has an anecdote with the analyzers. Like sometimes people don't understand this new technology that's changing the industry because they're trying to compare it with the existing technology. But the issue is, the breakthrough is that you cannot compare it. It operates differently. It's changing how we're thinking about the problems we're having versus you trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
for sure.
Yeah. And like this brings us back to the scale, I think, that we talked about at the beginning, because those companies have dominated the space because they didn't have to have any, like, there was no digital, right? It was just human contact. And there was so much of it from these companies, and there still is, that is one way for them to control the conversations. Like they're effectively the marketing team as well, just because they're always out messaging, and and that's a part of why that's successful, because they've reached the scale where they can be top of mind simply with human interaction, right? Which is impossible. Like you can't do that from the startup. And if you can just understand that dynamic, there are ways to do it online. It's just a completely different approach, right? And that's where, leaning on marketing expertise, understanding, how to control a message without being there to control it, right? Asynchronous communication, because that's why, the in-person teams, like, again, we can't replace that. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to match the scale and understand that if it's not a conversation, we're not there to explain the nuance of the situation. And, that's the beauty of having a sales guy. It's like you can control the conversation. You can be there, understand which way you need to deliver the message, right? It can be done online. It's just a much different, approach. You need the help of sales to do that, right? To understand, like, okay, if we see this, behavior, we're talking about this thing. If we see this behavior, it's a different thing. If we see this behavior, like, we're out. Like, we can't.
Yeah.
Let's not, steal that
When you're
nest,
saying
right?
it for somebody.
Right. So, yeah, man, this has been an awesome conversation, and we appreciate you talking about these challenges. And if there was one thing from the conversation that you'd want to highlight for the listeners, what would that be?
Let's see. I think I'm, at least for this point in my life, I'm championing the middlemen, and so I think sometimes salespeople get a bad rap. So I'd say that sales is kind of the funnel through which most of the communication flows from. From marketing, production, everything on the back end kind of funnels through sales to the end user, and then from the end user back through sales to the rest of the company. And so And maybe that's not the way it should be, but that's the way it is most of the time. And so I'd say lean on your salespeople for insights and trust their intuition. And then going back the other way, these salespeople don't necessarily know what they know. So they develop this kind of intuitive sense of communicating with people, but they don't know how to take that and turn it into a bigger strategy. So lean on them for insights, but then also know that you have to pull that out of them because they don't know. They don't know what they know. They don't know what they can offer the rest of the company.
That's well said.
Thank you, Clint, for that. That was really thoughtful. Thank you for being our guest today. And if our listeners want to find you, where they can find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Clint Kuykendall. I don't know if there's a better way and faster way to find me. I think there's 2 Clint Kuykendalls on LinkedIn, Kuykendall. And yeah, you'll figure out which one's me.
We'll make sure to put your profile wherever they find this podcast. And to whoever is listening to us, thank you for listening to us. And
thank you all so
see you in the
much.
next one.
Thanks so much, Clint.